We often receive calls into our studio by listeners of the moment complaining our attitude towards this current day government, and in particular Prime Minister, is disrespectful, untrue, and we should stop this practice immediately. Now, how can anyone not make comment on probably one of the most dangerous individuals we have ever witnessed in the office of the New Zealand Prime Minister? Her sinister desire to cancel out a democracy using te huhu, rewriting history to demonise our founders as insensitive, ugly people, to allow the movement to change our country's name by stealth, to encourage Maori language in schools and downplay the need for science teachings and programs, and have the ownership of water removed from the Crown and given to iwi to control and to own. And on top of that, her individual appointments of ministers leaving so many questions. Are those ideological-driven ministers making up her cabinet the best available? The scary thing is, it seems that they are. So you wonder if you are the lone voice in the wilderness uttering despair when, out of the blue, you receive this from a listener. And it's headed Chronicles of Clive, Ardern's Central Control Socialist Crusade, financed by Kiwis. And Clive has written this: although I have thought that for some time, until now I have been reluctant to share my belief that Ardern's social agenda propaganda campaign has been intentionally based on an evangelical, religious-style program. However, after reading the Herald article on the 24th of August headed, "Is Ardern the Messiah or a crafty MP?" answers may lie in past as a Mormon. I can now openly share my personal views on this particular subject. Now, if you watch Ardern, you often see her hold her hands in a praying position as she emphasises points, particularly those that many may find difficult to accept. She'll then spread her arms wide in an embracing stance, which is like a preacher calling the flock to follow her. The continual reference to team of 5 million and telling us to let be kind is encouraging us to believe we're all part of her congregation. This is totally orchestrated with the help of a huge communications and marketing team that we taxpayers are all paying for. The Herald article talks about specific examples where it is so clear she sees herself as a pseudo-religious leader. Now, remember last year, when during one of her daily sermons at 1 p.m, she announced that when she and Dr. Ashley Bloomfield spoke, they are the single source of truth. Sounds like a pronouncement from a medieval pope, does it not? It is interesting how most of us so easily criticise Brian Tamaki and his Destiny Church, yet people only join that church and pay money to it, and that's by choice. We taxpayers have no choice with having to be part and also pay for Ardern's crusade. Also interesting, although they are easy to criticise for some of their public statements, the Destiny Church leaders have taken children and whole families out of poverty, taken in the homeless and taken people away from the gangs. Ardern can't even come close to achieving any of those aims, all of which she promised to do. One of the common failures of evangelical-style leaders is that they are so caught up in their own beliefs that they tend not to have a true understanding of the real world. This is even more of a problem for those leaders who are inexperienced and have never worked in the private sector, and Ardern is one of those, and is now starting to show that failure, and the cracks are becoming more and more apparent. How, for example, did she ever think that it was acceptable to give the mongrel mob nearly $3 million for a meth program, and even worse, to a group closely associated with the head of the notorious chapter of the mongrel mob, which is one of the main distributors of methamphetamine in the Hawke's Bay. Local police just couldn't believe that the government could do this, and the police association came out strongly against it. With police seizing $2 million in assets from the Hawke's Bay mongrel mob during a major drug bust earlier this year, they then saw Ardern simply returning the money to them. The grant to the mongrel mob program has totally undermined the work of frontline police, destroying their hard work and undermining their confidence. Add to that Ardern sitting on the sideline and allowing a few imprisoned gang members to burn down a multi-million-dollar prison rather than possibly cause injury to those rioting criminals, and it allowed authorities could have removed them in a couple of hours, if not less, instead of the prison was just left to burn. These are examples of a Prime Minister and leadership team totally out of touch with reality. Add to this her current insistence on maintaining an elimination policy to deal with Delta variant of COVID, and we are now the last country in the world, other than a few very small isolated islands, to be doing this isolated program. It's just proof of this. Sadly, however, she will drive us into bankruptcy in an attempt to prove her power and the belief in herself. Certainly, we have no option but lockdown at the moment because of the near-criminal negligence of this government in failing to secure vaccines as soon as we could. To save $40 million, they are now costing us up to $1.5 billion every week. We have to extend lockdown. The biggest problem facing an evangelical leader, however, is when their promises and their prophecies don't come to fruition. Ardern's failures now make her a false prophet. Sure, we may get on top of this current outbreak, but at what cost? So be aware of Ardern's social experiment. She really doesn't care what we think because of the centralising schemes like Three Waters. Polytechnical Institute restructuring is already failing miserably, with over half the senior managers resigning along with the head of the restructure team. Promoting the significant natural area programs and the centralising of our health system, the Ministry of Health cannot even cope at the moment without ever considering managing the biggest restructuring in history. These schemes are all designed to take away our regional rights and transfer them to central government control. This Ardern-led government is orchestrating the biggest removal of personal rights we have ever seen in New Zealand. And remember, if Labour's hate speech legislation goes through without amendment, voiced opinions, observations and concerns like this could be subject to prosecution.